Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're tuning in, you're probably dreaming of having this vibrant, glowing slice of the ocean right there in your living room. And honestly, it is one of the most rewarding projects you can possibly take on. But before you run out to buy a tank or snag that first piece of coral, we really need to shift our mindset. You see, a reef tank isn't just a glass box filled with water and pretty fish. It's actually a delicately engineered living ecosystem. It takes true precision, a whole lot of patience, and a deep respect for the invisible processes that keep marine life thriving. So today, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know before you take the plunge. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. First up, we're redefining the reef tank. Second, the foundation. That's your size and equipment. Third, the invisible engine, which is tank cycling. Fourth, chemistry and consistent maintenance. And finally, livestock and the common pitfalls you really need to avoid. All right, section 1, redefining the reef tank, moving from a glass box to a living machine. Building a saltwater ecosystem requires a massive, massive paradigm shift in how you view aquarium keeping. So here's a question you really need to ask yourself on day one. What does ready actually mean? You know, it's incredibly tempting for eager beginners to look at a brand new setup, see crystal clear water, and just assume, great, it's ready for fish and coral. But in the reef keeping world, visually clear water does absolutely nothing to tell you if the environment is actually safe. We have to look much deeper than that. You'll quickly notice the huge jump in complexity you're about to make here. A basic freshwater setup, well, it can be pretty forgiving, but a saltwater reef system is an entirely different beast. It relies on extremely tight control over water chemistry and highly specific lighting. In a reef system, mistakes don't just give you a bit of cloudy water. They can harm your delicate animals very, very quickly. You are literally responsible for mimicking the stability of an entire ocean. Moving right along to section 2, foundation, size and equipment, building the physical shell of your ecosystem. Before we can even think about cultivating life, we need to make smart hardware choices and bust a few common industry myths. You've probably heard people say that with aquariums, bigger is always better. And yeah, there's definitely truth to that. Larger volumes of water are inherently more stable, while small tanks can suffer from rapid, dangerous parameter swings. But here is the absolutely crucial point. You have to choose a tank size you can maintain consistently. If your display tank is so massively oversized that your routine water changes become this exhausting chore, you're going to skip them. A really smart beginner path is choosing a reasonably sized display while making sure you've actually planned enough physical space in your home for the filtration system and your saltwater storage. On top of that, your new reef tank will ultimately succeed or fail based on the consistency of your equipment. These are the absolute non-negotiables. You need reliable lighting specifically tuned for the animals you want to keep. You need adequate water movement to simulate ocean currents. You absolutely must have a filtration setup that heavily supports biological stability. Next, do not scamp on a quality heater and redundant temperature monitoring. Seriously, have a backup. And finally, basic test tools, because you should never, ever be guessing about your water conditions. Now, as you scale up, optional gear like a protein skimmer or a refugium becomes incredibly helpful. But those core idols, they are the literal lifeline of your system. Section 3, the invisible engine, cycling, igniting the biological core of your tank. If you take only one thing away from this explainer, let it be this. The cycling phase is an absolutely unskippable step. Let's define what's actually happening here. Tank cycling is the process of establishing colonies of beneficial bacteria all throughout your rock and sand. These microscopic bacteria act as the essential machinery of your tank. Their entire job is to convert highly dangerous animal waste, like toxic ammonia, which is inevitable the second you add livestock, into less harmful forms. Without this invisible bacterial engine up and running, your tank is basically a ticking time bomb of toxicity. And this process demands literal weeks of patience. During week 1, you're just setting up and introducing that beneficial bacteria. If you get impatient, and trust me, it's tempting, and rush to add livestock in weeks 2 or 3, you are almost guaranteed to trigger lethal ammonia or nitrite spikes. It's usually not until week 4 or even later that regular testing will finally show stability. Remember what we said earlier? Looking clear doesn't mean it's cycled. Only consistent testing over weeks proves that your engine is actually operational. Section 4, chemistry and consistent maintenance, tracking the data over guesswork. Once that biological engine is humming along, your job shifts to long-term upkeep. This is where we stop guessing and start treating our role a bit more like a data-driven scientist. I want to highlight this fantastic quote directly from our source material. Beginners often focus on a single reading, but the better approach is tracking trends. This is such a profound shift in mindset. Your tank's parameters are going to naturally drift. Evaporation changes things, feeding changes things, your lighting schedule changes things. If you panic over one single isolated test result, you're probably going to overreact. You really need to look at the big picture and monitor how the data moves over time. When you start tracking those trends, you begin to notice natural rhythms. Just think about how these parameters shift. Your salinity is going to drift upward, simply because water evaporates, leaving the salt behind. Your alkalinity and calcium, they'll actually drop because your growing corals are actively pulling them right out of the water. Nitrates and phosphates will climb based on how much you feed the tank. By setting up a simple testing routine early on, you learn to understand these natural rhythms. And that is what saves you from the dreaded mystery problem cycle. Where a beginner tries to quickly fix one issue with a heavy dose of chemicals, only to make a totally different parameter violently worse. Finally, Section 5. Livestock and common pitfalls. Populating and sustaining the machine. Okay, so we've built the foundation, we've cycled the engine, and we're tracking our data. Now we finally get to populate the machine and face the realities of sustaining it. When it's time to add life to your tank, you have to follow a staged approach. Step 1. Start with hardy species that are forgiving of a newly established environment. Step 2. Just pause. Give your tanks biological filtration time to stabilize and adapt to the new bioload. That's basically the amount of waste your new animals are producing. Step 3. Plan gradual introductions in stages. Make sure every single coral and fish you choose matches your specific lighting, flow, and feeding capabilities. A super common and frankly devastating beginner mistake is adding way too much livestock too soon. It immediately overwhelms that invisible bacteria engine we talked about and causes wild parameter swings. We also need to do a quick reality check on the cost of this hobby, because the initial tank purchase is really just a fraction of the big picture. Your real, recurring budget includes constantly buying high-quality salt mix, sourcing extremely pure reverse osmosis water for your top-offs and water changes, and continuously replacing chemical test reagents, filter media, and eventually your lights. But I want you to look closely at that final point, your dedicated time. Committing to regular testing and water change schedules is a massive investment, and honestly, it matters just as much as any fancy, expensive hardware you buy. This consistent tracking we've been talking about is exactly what will save you during an emergency. When things look wrong in the tank, the beginner's immediate urge is to panic. They make large, sweeping water chemistry changes way too quickly, completely ignoring the fact that something simple like evaporation might be the culprit. But the true reef keeper method? Well, when something seems off, they stop and focus first on the absolute basics. Is the temperature correct? Has the salinity spiked just because I forgot to top off the fresh water? What does my recent testing history actually show? You should always verify the foundational metrics before you start chasing complicated chemical fixes. Bringing it all together, here is the core thesis you need to walk away with. With a thoughtful setup and realistic expectations, you can absolutely build a thriving reef. The key is to treat reef keeping like a highly controlled system. Introduce changes slowly, measure the parameters that actually matter, and above all else, let the tank mature at its own pace. I want to leave you with this final critical question as you embark on this whole journey. Will you have the patience to let your meticulously planned ecosystem mature on its own timeline, or will you succumb to the temptation to rush the invisible engine? Your success and the health of the incredible animals you plan to keep relies entirely on your answer. So embrace the process, respect the chemistry, and you'll be well on your way to mastering the art of the reef tank. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and happy reefing.